Committee on Science, Space, and Technology joint hearing of the Subcommittee on Oversight and the Subcommittee on Research and Technology will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recess of the committee at any time. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing titled, Is NSF Managing Its Rotating Staff? I recognize myself now for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I would like to thank our witnesses for being here this morning, and I'm looking forward to hearing from both of you on this very important matter. We're here today to discuss the National Science Foundation's use of the Rotator Program, specifically the individuals who are assigned through the Intergovernment Personnel Act, or IPAs. These IPAs are top scientists, engineers, and educators from universities and industry who help staff the NSF on a temporary basis. In addition, the NSF employs visiting scientists, engineers, and educators, which together with the IPAs form the NSF Rotator Program. While the Rotator Program brings expertise, diverse skill sets, and fresh perspective to the NSF, IPAs come with a significant cost to the NSF, which is completely unacceptable. For example, these IPAs remain an employee of their home institution, and their salaries are matched by the NSF through their tenure as an IPA, typically ranging from 1 to 3 years. In addition to salary matching, the NSF pays IPAs lost consulting fees, individual research and development travel, fringe benefits, and temporary living expenses. Considering that NSF employs 184 IPAs, which is 12% of the total NSF workforce, these costs add up very quickly. In fact, according to the 2013 NSF Inspector General Report, IPAs cost the NSF $36,448 more per IPA on average than the average permanent federal employee, and in the 2013 NSF spent more than $6.7 million on IPA-related costs. When an agency is spending millions on rotating staff, not permanent staff, one would hope that they are the best suited individuals for the positions they are filling. However, that doesn't appear to be the case with the NSF. In 2010, an NSF IG report found that IPAs in management level positions at the NSF lacked institutional knowledge about the federal employment protocol, training, and expectations, all key management issues and functions. The NSF funds a variety of large research projects, including multi-user research facilities, tools for research and education, and distributed instrumentation networks. Taking into account that some of these IPAs come from organizations and institutions that would be interested in some of these funds, there is also the chance that if not properly managed, an IPA could have a conflict of interest with certain proposals and awards. The NSF IG recently released a report detailing a situation that falls into this category, which I am looking forward to learning more about today. As a small business owner, I unconditionally understand the need for accountability. The fact that these temporary staffers are being paid more money for jobs that they are not necessarily qualified for and have an inherent ability to take advantage of is completely inexcusable. Without proper oversight, the NSF is wasting taxpayer dollars on individuals who make more money than they should for jobs that they may not be qualified for and roles that are susceptible to conflicts of interest. This committee has warned the NSF about the irresponsible spending over the past few years, and this is just another unfortunate example. When will the NSF take adequate measures to implement proper oversight, management, and plain responsibility? I look forward to today's hearing, which I anticipate will inform us more about IPAs and the NSF, the management of them, as well as the oversight and accountability of what they are being paid. We owe it to the American people to ensure that these assignments are not using hard-earned taxpayer money to overpay for subpar work. How does that seem fair? In the end, though, I hope that this hearing will bring to light the issue of rotating staff and inform us on how to better provide oversight and management of federally funded rotating staff to guarantee taxpayers that they can trust us with their money, and I know it will be spent in the most efficient way. I now recognize the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Oversight, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Beyer, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The National Science Foundation employs thousands of hardworking scientists and staff, many of whom live in my district. And I value the tremendous benefit that the agency has brought to America and Americans over the past 65 years by supporting a wide range of scientific discoveries that have improved our understanding of every facet of the world around us. As with any organization, public or private, sometimes problems emerge. Management improvements can be made and administrative oversight enhanced. Today's hearing will focus on the management oversight of the NSF's Rotator Program. The NSF's rotator program, primarily Intergovernmental Personnel Act positions, allows non-federal employees from academic institutions and research labs to work at NSF for a temporary period of up to 4 years. The advantage of this program is that it guarantees a continuous infusion of scholars at the forefronts of their fields. This approach to staffing is similar to another program that has long been viewed as one of the most valuable in the U.S. government, in fact, the most valuable in the world, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. DARPA also relies on rotators to come in and manage research portfolios focused on innovative, emerging research. While there are obvious benefits to this program, it's impossible to use such a system without running some risks. IPA staff are not necessarily trained managers, but fill professional staff positions. And as NSF relies on the IPA program to fill positions far in excess of other federal agencies. This can cause some problems among rank-and-file employees. IPAs have also not been brought up through the civil service ranks with an appreciation of the importance of avoiding conflicts of interest. Each year, NSF provides around $7 billion in grant awards and cooperative agreements to academic institutions. It's widely praised for the efficiency of its grants management system and widely copied by foreign governments looking to spur creativity and innovation. However, when employees of grant-receiving institutions come to NSF on temporary assignment, it's important that the Foundation routinely ensure that each rotator is properly trained and monitored to ensure they manage their portfolio wisely and in compliance with the law. The Foundation must take prompt steps to identify potential conflicts of interest, and that the rotators have the proper training to understand their obligations to avoid violating conflict of interest rules at the agency. Today we'll hear from the Inspector General about a single rotator who failed to meet obligations for disclosing conflicts and for taking ethics training. The IG found that the individual was involved in 3 grant decisions where inappropriate ties to the grant recipient call into question the integrity of the award. It's hard to determine whether the degree of this one failing represents systemic issues with the way NSF manages IPAs or whether it's just an unfortunate one-off failing. But I agree with the IG that this incident points to broader management issues regarding NSF's oversight of the rotator program, and the recommendations contained in their report seem reasonable and obviously overdue. I know NSF has not had much time to evaluate the specific recommendations, but I believe that where management problems exist, they need to be quickly fixed. Where conflicts of interest emerge, they need to be removed and rectified, and the public has to have confidence that NSF is managing its funds with absolute integrity. These new recommendations regarding conflict of interest policies join a standing list of other Inspector General recommendations on the I program that were designed to control the costs of that program. While NSF has moved to put some of these changes in place, I'm disappointed to learn that those reforms have been moving on a very, very slow track. Without endorsing any particular recommendation at this time, NSF should know that we, the members of this Oversight Committee, expect its leadership to do more and quickly in this area. I believe that the rotator program as a whole can bring great benefit to NSF and to the federal government. It helps to spark fresh and innovative ideas. It fosters collaboration between the federal government and America's intellectually rich academic community, and improves the advancement of scientific discoveries and cutting-edge technological developments in a wide range of subjects. As we strive to promote greater economic efficiencies on the NSF rotator program, I believe it's important to keep the benefits of the program in mind. One bad case does not a crisis make, and the committee would be well served to keep this in mind. We read the sad story of the 2-star Army general this week in trouble. We've watched how various members of our Congress have been in trouble just this year, and we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I look forward to hearing from our 2 witnesses both about the issues that have been identified and about the actions you've taken to correct them. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Beyer. If there are any members who wish to submit additional opening statements, or statements will be added to the record at this point. At this point, I ask unanimous consent to enter documents into the record without objection. This time, I'd like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Ms. Allison Lerner. Ms. Lerner is the Inspector General for the National Science Foundation, or the NSF. Before joining the NSF in April 2009, Ms. Lerner served in many leadership positions at the Department of Commerce, including counsel to the Inspector General. She has received several national awards for excellence and was selected to be a member of the Government Accountability and Transparency Board by the President in June 2011. Ms. Lerner received her law and undergraduate degrees from the University of Texas. The final witness today on today's panel is Dr. Richard Bukayas. Dr. Bukayas is the Chief Operating Officer for the NSF. Mr. Bukayas assumed his position of COO in October 2014, having previously been a Senior Policy Advisor for NSF. He is an author and co-author of numerous publications on the topics of radiation, heat transfer, numerical, fluid mechanics, and combustion. Dr. Bacchias received his bachelor's, master's, and PhD in mechanical engineering at the University of California, Berkeley. Okay. At this point, the chair would like to recognize the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Research and Technology, the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Lipinski, for her opening statement.
Well, kind of close.
Or his. I'm sorry,
Thank
sir.
you.
My apologies. Instead of I thought I had it right, and then I read the script.
That's always a mistake.
Yes. My apologies.
I apologize for being late. I understand we had to move this up because of votes. I want to thank Chairman Loudermilk and Chairwoman Comstock for holding this hearing on NSF's management of the IPA Rotator program. I want to thank Dr. Bacchias, Ms. Lerner, for being here. Good morning. We know what the issues are. Reports issued by the NSF Inspector General over the last few years, including last Friday's report, make it clear that there are some management and oversight issues with the Rotator program that are worthy of our concern and attention. However, as we pursue our oversight responsibilities, we should not lose sight of tremendous value that the Rotator program brings to NSF and to the scientific community. NSF has a very talented workforce across the board. Long-term federal employees serving in program officer and executive positions come to the agency with many years of experience in scientific research, as well as in managing program budgets and participating in NSF grant review process. Those recruited to executive positions are also experienced managers. After several years at NSF, their institutional memory and knowledge of federal rules and regulations is invaluable. But we also know that rotators also come to the NSF with many years of experience and similar skills. And what makes the Rotator program unique and essential is that rotators provide a constant influx of new ideas, new perspectives, and a frontline understanding of emerging trends in science and engineering. As such, they are particularly well placed to evaluate high-risk, high-reward research proposals and ensure that NSF continues to support a portfolio that includes transformative research, a topic which we discuss often in this committee. While exploring options to strengthen management of the program and to implement cost controls, we should not, even unintentionally, take steps that compromise the benefits this program provides to the agency and to scientific progress. Now, having said that, the Inspector General has raised several issues in the last few years that warrant our review. From the costs associated with the IPA program to the management benefits, such as independent research and development, and the requirements, such as ethics training, there is room for improvement. The Foundation received the most recent report on a conflict of interest case only last Friday, giving them little time to review the specific recommendations. It might have been better, perhaps, to postpone this hearing by a couple months. However, we are here today, and this particular case dates back to 2013, so I expect Dr. Bacchias will be able to share with us some of his thinking about what went wrong in terms of management controls and how procedures can be tightened up going forward. I also hope that Dr. Bacchias will be able to share with us actions NSF has taken since the 2012 and 2013 IG reports to strengthen management and oversight of other aspects of the Rotator program. In no way do I want to diminish the issues that have been raised. We need to make sure that we are providing oversight and that NSF is responding appropriately to the findings. I want to thank the witnesses for being here. I look forward to your testimony. Thank you.
Again, thank you, Mr. Lipinski, and again, my sincere apologies. Pursuant to the committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. If you'll please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Before we begin, I will request that our witnesses please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. It seems there will be another series of votes called in about an hour, and I want to make sure that we have time for discussion. Your entire written statement will be made part of the record. I now recognize Ms. Lerner for 5 minutes to present her testimony.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate this opportunity to discuss my office's oversight of NSF's management of its rotating staff, especially assignments under the Intergovernmental Personnel Act. I'll focus on findings and recommendations made in 3 audits completed by my office, one on costs associated with NSF's use of rotators, a second on personnel management issues related to rotators, and a third on NSF's management and oversight of the Independent Research and Development Program, or IR&D. Finally, since rotators often make funding decisions, I'll discuss a recent investigative report which identified ways for NSF to improve its controls to identify and mitigate rotators' conflicts of interests. To advance its mission of supporting science and engineering research and education, NSF brings scientists, engineers, and educators from academia, industry, or other organizations to the Foundation for rotational assignments of up to 4 years. While there are definitely benefits that come from having rotators at NSF, there are also challenges. For example, because of rotators' limited tenure, there's almost constant turnover in staff, especially in senior leadership positions. Other challenges include higher costs for rotators and rotators' lack of familiarity with government processes and culture. The additional cost of using rotators instead of permanent federal employees is considerable. We found that NSF paid an added cost of approximately $6.7 million, or an average of over $36,000 per IPA, for the 184 IPAs we looked at in a 2013 audit. We recommended that NSF evaluate ways to reduce these costs, such as increasing rotators' use of telework, increasing cost sharing by home institutions, and limiting salary to the maximum federal pay rate for the position. NSF has developed a plan to examine rotator costs, but much work remains to be done to accomplish the actions included in that plan. NSF's reliance on rotators also poses personnel management challenges. For example, at the time of our 2010 audit, NSF did not require rotators to have annual performance evaluations, even though they functioned in the same capacity as NSF's federal executives who are evaluated each year. As a result, NSF risks not holding IPAs accountable, as it does federal employees, for accomplishing NSF's missions and goals. In response to our recommendations, NSF has brought all IPAs under a performance management system and reports that it received 117 IPA appraisals in the most recent cycle. We also examined controls over NSF's IR&D program, which is utilized primarily by rotators to maintain their professional competencies and remain actively involved with their research while at NSF. At the time of our 2012 audit, NSF policy allowed IR&D participants to spend up to 50 days a year, or 20% of their time, on IR&D activities. In 2010, IR&D travel costs were $1.8 million. Rotators and other visiting scientists took 90% of the IR&D trips during this period. Since our audit, the Foundation has strengthened oversight of the IR&D program and taken steps to reduce its costs. In light of the Foundation's reliance on rotators to make funding decisions, it's critical that strong controls be in place to identify and mitigate conflicts of interest that occur as a result of rotators' research activities or their connections with their home institutions. Such controls protect rotators, many of whom have never worked in a federal environment, as well as the Foundation itself. A recent investigative report documented problems with controls over COIs that we identified in the context of one rotator's tenure at NSF. We found that no concrete plan to manage the rotator's known conflict was developed and communicated, that there were significant delays in the rotator's completion of a required ethics course and her submission of a required financial disclosure form, that actions taken to assess the impact of the rotator's conflicts of interest on an award she made were seriously flawed, that the names of the persons who wrote the justification for funding and who actually made the decision to fund the award with which the rotator had conflicts were not included in NSF's system of record, undermining the agency's ability to identify and mitigate conflicts of interest, and that a critical tool used to enforce the one-year cooling-off period following the rotator's tenure at NSF was circumvented. We recommended that NSF take various actions to strengthen its controls over conflicts. Since we just issued our investigative report last week, the agency has not had an opportunity to formally respond. Rotating staff are an important component of NSF's workforce and bring valuable experience to the Foundation. While we recognize the significant contributions made by rotators, it's essential for NSF to examine the cost associated with the rotator program to ensure that federal funds entrusted to the Foundation are being spent effectively and efficiently. It's also critical that funding justifications and recommendations made by rotators be free from conflicts of interest, as the integrity of those decisions is essential to NSF's merit review process. My office remains committed to providing rigorous, independent oversight of NSF's management of its rotating staff and will continue to work with the Foundation and the Congress to this end. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Lerner. and now recognize Dr. Bukaias for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss NSF's rotator programs, particularly, as you've heard, the IPA assignments. NSF supports fundamental research at the frontier across all fields of science and engineering through an investment in more than 42,000 active awards. NSF seeks to create and exploit new concepts in science and engineering and provide global leadership in research and education. This requires NSF to create an ever-changing vision for the future innovations and provide the resources to make vision into a reality. The expertise needed to carry out this work is constantly changing. The challenge for NSF is to blend change with continuity in managing our merit review process and overseeing our awards. A mix of federal employees and rotators, some of whom are IPAs, is essential to NSF. Experienced federal employees provide continuity of scientific expertise, management, oversight, while rotators come from across the country with new perspectives in science, engineering, and education. Because NSF supports fundamental research at the frontier, NSF relies on a mix of federal employees and rotators for a constant infusion of new knowledge into the structure of the rigorous merit review and post-award oversight. The scientific community sees serving as a rotator at NSF as a public service. The opportunity to serve while expanding the rotator's scientific perspectives can disrupt the rotator's personal life and lead to a loss in continuity at the home institution. The IPA's home institution benefits from the experience and expertise the IPA gains, but it does not have access to the faculty members' contributions and all the usual functions during the IPA assignment. Therefore, it is important for NSF to avoid negative impacts on these rotators who choose to engage in the public service. NSF costs and the oversight of our staff are continually monitored. Reducing our overhead costs to fund discoverers and discoveries is always a goal, and this must be balanced with the impact on our programs and the community. In the case of IPAs, NSF requests cost sharing from all potential rotators and scrutinizes all salaries above the maximum federal rate. While rotators perform their responsibilities at NSF, they are not allowed to handle any matters related to their home institution and are subject to NSF policies on conflict of interest, performance, training, and conduct. Like federal employees, rotators must follow conflict of interest statutes as well as government-wide ethics regulations. To bolster the awareness and compliance of these statutes and regulations, IPAs, like other federal colleagues, are subject to mandatory conflict of interest training. Also, like other federal employees, IPAs provide performance plans for their IPA service. The Foundation has benefited from the Office of the Inspector General reports on opportunities to improve the NSF IPA programs. As she has referred, the 2010 OIG report noted importance in improving the IPAs in the agency's formal performance management system. NSF responded by taking action to incorporate all IPAs, including those operating at and below the executive level, into the agency's formal performance management system, and the OIG recommendation was satisfied the very next year. The change ensures that IPAs are held accountable to the agency and to the taxpayers. This approach to accountability is also applied to NSF's Independent Research and Development Program, IRD. In response to the OIG management report that identified internal control issues on our IRD program, NSF immediately formed a task group and proposed changes. In 2012, the OIG auditors favorably reviewed the task force recommendations and suggested additional controls. NSF put those controls in place. The IRD program, available to federal employees and rotators, now has much more accountability. I recognize that the OIG released a new report last Friday, focused on the management of conflict of interest of our rotators. It is important to note that this was one specific case. Well before the release of the OIG report, the agency worked to address the situation and hold individuals accountable. My written testimony does not address the report's recommendations due to the timing of its release. I would like to thank the IG, though, for her support of NSF and for her concerns about the integrity of the IPA program. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, bringing scientists, engineers, and educators from the community to join NSF's permanent staff contributes to the NSF mission of advancing the progress of science and its strategic goals of transforming the frontiers and addressing national needs. The rotator programs at NSF, including the IPA assignments, are essential elements of achieving NSF's mission. With the support of the OIG, Congress, the Foundation will continue to enhance these programs to best serve science and technology in the national interest. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you to both of our witnesses for being here today. And now we're going to begin our questioning, and the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. As I mentioned in my opening statement, the IG found that in 2013, the NSF spent more than $6.7 million on IPA-related costs, with the NSF spending on average $33,448 more on IPA assignments than average permanent federal employees. These costs include salary matching, loss consulting fees, individual research and development, travel, fringe benefits, and temporary living expenses. Dr. Bacchius, of that $6.7 million spent in 2013, how much of it was spent on these varying costs that I just mentioned?
You want the you want the fractions on each one of those?
Yes, sir.
So the biggest one is $3 million on salaries of the 6.7. It's important to note, too, if you read her report carefully in a footnote, it only provides you the numbers for those that are above the federal rate. If you include those that are below the federal rate, the net gain is only half of that, $1.5 million. The other costs, loss consulting, travel allowance, location allowance, and IR&D are accurate as far as we can tell. It's also important to note, though, that the IRD is available to all rotators and federal employees at NSF. Only 63% of those allocations are to IPAs. The rest goes to federal employees and visitors. So it's not only available to IPAs.
Okay. Thank you. Can you tell me, what did the National Science Foundation spend in 2014 on IPA-related costs?
I'm sorry, I can get you that number. I don't have that with me.
Okay. You don't?
No, I do not.
Mr. Lerner, do you know what that number is?
I do not.
Okay. That would be helpful if you could get back with us on that number. Dr. Bacchius, how do you justify the additional cost these IPA assignments of these IPA assignments than what you pay the average permanent federal employee?
So as it's been discussed by Lerner as well as Mr. Lipinski, this is a very different agency than a lot of the other agencies. The IPA, the rotator program, is an absolutely essential part of our program. We have very, very excellent federal employees that give us the continuity. But we don't have the ability, unlike, say, DOE, that has staff that does research at the forefront, has facilities at the forefront. We don't do that. That's not in our mission. So by bringing these forefront leaders into our agency, they're able to bring that new expertise, bring that new knowledge, bring the ability to change into our agency. This is essential to our agency. So the cost that we have to pay, we want to make sure that we can recruit the best possible leaders and scholars to come and help this agency. And therefore, we really need to be able to pay market force value for these folks in order to get them to come to the agency and serve.
Can I ask you, what benefit do these scientists and other IPAs have of leaving their permanent job to take a leave of absence or whatever to come to NSF?
Okay, so let me just preface this with, I am an IPA, and I also was a department head, and I also was an AD, and so I've been on all sides of this issue. So the IPA is probably, as a rotator, and when they first come, which I did in '88, you're trying to manage your program at the university, your students, and you're trying to also manage the portfolio that you're having to access at NSF. So it requires you to really, I would argue, that most IPAs that are involved in this probably work, more than 40 hours a week for sure, just in order to make it all work. Your family sometimes stays at home. You then come and spend your time here. And in all fairness, it's 24/7 kind of a job then, because, right, you don't have your family with you. And so you spend a lot of time doing it. The home institution, though, gains too. So I don't want to ever belittle that. By bringing the IPA back, the IPA then has a much broader perspective of what the country's about, what the research is about, and that will help. That will definitely help the home unit. But unfortunately, the home unit doesn't gain all the other attributes that the faculty member provides: committee work, general advising, issues that relate to the community aspects of a department. You lost all that. So the department gains and loses. The IPA gains and loses. What happens, though, is when you're on the side of NSF and we want to recruit these top scholars and we want them to come, we don't want to have any impediments that'll make it more difficult for them to come. As a department head, also, I often don't want them to go either because I need them as a department head. So it's this constant balance. And I think the way we've done it so far, I think everybody gains and everybody loses, and I think that's probably the fairest way we can go.
One last question. I see I'm running out of time, and I'll be respectful of everyone's time. Is there a recruitment issue, or do you have a backlog of those that want to be IPA?
It is a recruitment issue. We often don't get the people we want. For all the commitments that I've just said, individuals, when they consider coming to NSF, it really affects their long-term career programs, their research programs, and they have to balance that with the public service.
Are you fully staffed now?
In IPAs, no. We can go up to 195, and I think you said we're at 180. We've been down to as low as 173.
Okay. Thank you. I see my time's expired, and I now recognize Mr. Beyer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bacchias, I was going to ask you a question about can full-time, long-term government employees provide the same kind of insight and creativity in science that these IPAs do, and I think you've done a great job answering that. I am concerned, though, that the same argument can be made for many other government agencies. For example, the Department of Justice, where I see lots of sort of mid-career, brilliant attorneys stolen out of private practice who come work for the same governmental maximum for 3, 4, 6 years in order to contribute their expertise on terrorism, on financing, and lots of interesting things. But I'm also particularly aware of the balance between outside people who come in and the long-term federal employees. I was a politically appointed ambassador, and so I'm very sensitive to how that affected the morale of the career Foreign Service officers who perhaps didn't get a chance to be ambassador because these political guys were there. So I look at the numbers, the ones that I have at least, of the 7 assistant directors, 6 are IPAs. Of the 32 division directors, 24 are IPAs. If so many of these top-level positions are filled by IPAs, doesn't it give the rank-and-file federal service worker not much hope for career advancement? And what is the effect on morale?
So that's a very difficult question for me to answer. I have heard of a few complaints, really very few though, by the career federal employees regarding their interactions with IPAs. So they also gain a lot too, right? So if I'm a federal employee and I'm running a program, and I have an IPA that comes in and runs a similar program, I get to exchange creative ideas that the IPA can bring at the forefront, where I might not have that experience. So even individual at the one-on-one kind of level, there's a lot to be gained. Regarding the executive service, I think you're accurate. I think that the percentage of IPAs in our most senior leadership positions is larger than the overall fraction of IPAs in the agency. We do, though, have a number of federal employees that end up being our division directors as well as our office heads, and so it's not that it's closed out, it's just that it's not as probable. Typically, though, and I noted a couple of comments that they don't bring the federal experience to these leadership roles. That's a true statement, but they bring a lot of leadership. We have folks that have led major departments, led major colleges in case of engineering around this country, so they have a lot of leadership skills. They just might have to get a little more fine-tuned on the federal issues. But by and large, I think they're really superb leaders.
You jumped ahead to another question I have, which is what necessarily makes a great scientist a great manager? Because I don't see them as equivalent at all.
And I think you're right. Okay, and I'll agree with that. There are some scientists, engineers who probably shouldn't be leaders. Okay, they're much better doing the fundamental research and leading students. But then there are those that actually have a very strong research portfolio, and they also are very good leaders. And so in the case I just referred to, we have deans and department heads who are leading major units around this country who come to NSF and impart that leadership ability into the agency, and I think it's really valuable.
Doctor, let me get to what seems to be perhaps the most existential question here. And forgive me for misinterpreting, is how much of the dependence on IPAs with the associated problems and benefits is, or let's just say overdependence on IPAs, is because we in Congress don't authorize enough money for long-term federal staff, and therefore you have to take resources out of the research budget to fund the IPAs? And would, if we committed more money to the full-time government service, say a 50-50 ratio or whatever it is, would we be able to have more money for the research that then does so much good things?
Well, so that
Is this, are IPAs a back way of avoiding what decisions we make on our budget committee?
So my answer to that would be no. Regardless of where you tell us to put the money for an IPA, we would still think that they're essential, and we would still hire them and recruit them the way we do now, regardless of where the money comes from. For the reasons I've just stated, because of the nature of this agency, because of the fact that we don't have these large facilities doing fundamental research, we need this infusion of folks. So we take it out of R&RA. If it was in AOAM, it would be, I have no real input on that, because we still would need those folks in the agency in order to be able to make us have the impact that we're having.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. Chair now recognizes Mr. Posey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Buckus, can you describe in one sentence the rotators or the IPA employee? I mean, would you call them like rental experts that you bring in? Just the shortest possible description for me.
Of what they do or who they are?
Both.
Okay, so they're typically leaders and scholars from around the country, and they provide two things for us. They provide an infusion of new, creative, leading-edge thought, as well as function, to perform some of the functions.
but so they're part-timers you bring on?
No, they're full-time employees for a short period of time.
For a short period of time, okay. Can you give me an example of one or two of them that you think are especially valuable and what they do?
Okay, well, so let me be personal, because I've done all this. So I've been a program person.
No, not you. Give me another one. Use another one.
Okay, good, because I don't like to talk about myself. In the case of, say, one of our leaders who comes from a major institution, it was a dean, leads now one of our major directorates, has moved that directorate into different areas that weren't before, has even taken employees.
Okay, that's esoteric platitudes. Anything really specific you can tell me?
I think we're looking for leadership, and that's leadership.
Well, you can say that about anybody. In March 2013, it was stated that the NSF paid 54 IPAs salaries exceeding the federal executive pay limit of almost $180,000, which is about probably 5 times the average annual wage in my district, which is the highest salary earned by federal employees at NSF, including presidential appointees. Of these 54 IPAs, the NSF paid 34 a salary of over $200,000 in annual salary and over $300,000 to an assistant director. Do you believe that was appropriate compensation?
Yes, I do.
Okay. What procedures does NSF have in place to properly assess the cost-to-benefit ratio of these high-dollar rental people or temporary people?
So NSF over the years has done a number of independent studies by various organizations. NAPA, OPM, GAO have all done assessments of our program, and they have recommended changes, just like Lerner has recommended. At the same time, they've given very positive remarks about the program.
Okay. 54 IPAs earned a salary over the federal executive pay limit. Do you believe that's fair to the NSF's own employees who cannot receive compensation that exceeds a pay grade of almost $180,000?
So remember the reason why we bring them. We bring them to do function, and we bring them to do leadership and forefront activities.
I know they have talent that your own people don't have, presumably.
No, they have different talents.
Oh, okay. I was surprised to find Mrs. Lerner's revelation that the temporary employees you bring in are responsible for making award funding decisions. Can you tell me if any of them had any hand in awarding these grants? $340,000 to study human set fires in New Zealand in the 1980s, $227,000 to study pictures of animals in National Geographic magazine, $200,000 to study Turkish failing fashion industry, $1.5 million to study pasture management in Mongolia, $50,000 to study civil lawsuits in Peru in 1600 to 1700, $200,000 to study gender bias in Wikipedia pages, $164,000 to study Chinese immigration in Italy, $170,000 for 2 studies of native peoples basket weaving in Alaska, $487,000 to study textiles and gender in Iceland from 874 to 1800, the Viking era. $136,000 to repatriate recordings of traditional Alaskan music from the 1940s. $50,000 for stem cell education in Sri Lanka. $15,000 to study gender and fishing practices at Lake Victoria, Africa. $147,000 to study international marriages between France and Madagascar. And pages here, but can you tell me if any of these temporary employees were responsible for funding any of those projects? Absolutely, unequivocally, yes or no?
I cannot tell you who has funded those, but we surely can get you that information, whether they're federal employees or rotators.
But they would have, rotators would have responsibility to fund crap like this, right? I mean projects like this.
Could fund projects like that, yes.
Thank you. I see my time's up, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. The chair now recognizes Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I certainly agree, Dr. Bukais, that the rotator program is an essential element of the NSF mission, as you stated. And I have to say, it's a little surprising to me to hear such strong Republican support for federal employees, as we've heard here. But welcome that. But I think the rotator program is very important. But and I've been a defender of it. And when there have been issues that have come up, I've defended it. But there are issues that need to be dealt with here. And I wanted to ask about a couple of the IG recommendations that have not been. My understanding is that NSF has not followed through on the recommendations. And these two are, first of all, the IG recommended that NSF appoint a single individual to help champion the NSF Rotator program, who would also help improve NSF oversight of the program. The second one is the IG recommended that the NSF produce formal guidelines on travel and possible telework for those engaged in the IRD program. Could you address why NSF has not followed through on either of those recommendations?
So the first one regarding an individual, I cannot really answer that question. As I said, I came in October, and I don't know what the practices were before then. I think it's a very good recommendation. I see no reason why we shouldn't do that. On the telework issue, we are starting to implement that. I'm not confident it's going to see the significant cost savings that it's been purported to. So I think we have to run the experiment and see if this actually plays out. The other two issues that, or the main issue that was brought up was regarding cost share. We ask every IPA when they are working on their contract if they will cost share. And some can and some do not. Part of the problem, I think, is with a lot of the public institutions around the country now are not seeing the budgets that they saw before, and therefore providing cost share for these kinds of activities is becoming harder and harder. And so that's a worry from the point of view of cost savings.
Okay, and I was going to ask this the other two questions the other way around. I want to make sure you had an opportunity to answer those two. Ms. Lerner, can you just mention some of the things very briefly? Now, you discussed some of these. What has the NSF recommendations, have they implemented in a way that you think has been very responsive and helpful to the rotator program?
I think NSF has done a fantastic job of implementing the recommendations that we made with respect to the IR&D program. And we made recommendations initially out of a management implication report, and NSF set up an IR&D task group. We also then did a further audit and made additional recommendations, and NSF has been tremendously responsive. They have, when we did our audit, they had no idea how much money they were spending on the IR&D program, and they didn't know how much time people were charging. They now have codes to track both of those things. There's an annual report on costs associated with the IR&D program that they provided in 2013, 2014, and I'm sure they will in 2015. So there's much more oversight of the program that's taking place. They have provided more training for people who are using the program and who are approving the proposals for people who want to participate in the program, so there's a better understanding of how that's working. So I think what in that area in particular, you've seen a great way that the agency can respond to concerns that the IG has raised and take them to the next level. So,
not to diminish any of your recommendations, but what do you think are the most important ones that NSF still needs to follow up on?
I think certainly taking more concrete actions with respect to the recommendations that we made about the cost of rotators would be quite important. I know what we recognized is that there are a large number of rotators who are not the senior managers. And so it seems like there are, after an initial period for them to get used to the foundation, there are real opportunities to use telework there more robustly, especially with all of the technical tools that we have and the ability to run virtual panels as well. So I really would like to see more action on that with respect to that recommendation. And on the cost sharing, I mean, certainly we recognize people are asked about whether they want to cost share, but there hasn't been, we did not see, and when we did our audit work, much in the way of negotiation. So it would be helpful if the document that they had wanted to prepare that outlined the benefits and that made it easier for them to have to really negotiate that was finalized.
Thank you. You'll be back.
All right, here's the posture we're in right now. Votes obviously have been called. We only have two other members who are here to ask questions. And what I propose is if each member would keep their questions to less than 5 minutes, and if the witnesses would be succinct and concise with their answers, we could go ahead and finish out. Otherwise, that way we wouldn't have to hold you over till after votes, if that works with everyone. All right. So at this point, the chair recognizes Mr. Westerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll talk fast for a guy from Arkansas. Ms. Lerner, your most recent report focused on an IPA conflict of interest at the NSF and found that NSF failed to develop a clear plan to manage and mitigate the IPA's known conflict of interest from the outset. Is it true that it took months for the IPA to meet with their division conflicts official to discuss how to handle the conflict of interest?
That's what we were informed.
So given the seriousness of conflict of interest and those type of issues, have you found that this kind of delay is commonplace at NSF based on your work?
I can't speak to. We haven't looked broadly to see if this issue is recurring. That's certainly something that I think we want to talk with the agency about what we do moving forward to determine the breadth of these issues.
Do you believe proper procedures are in place to mitigate this kind of issue in the future?
If I did, we would not have made the recommendations that we did. I think what we identified are real opportunities to tighten controls so that it's clear to everybody that when these people come on, there needs to be prompt action to train them, to identify the conflicts, and to make sure that there's a plan in place to manage them.
Okay, so from your work when you investigated an IPA at the NSF, you found that it had clear conflicts of interest present, and they ultimately contributed to the awarding of 3 grants that you found did not meet the merits consistent with standard NSF practices. That is correct?
That's it wasn't our determination. It was the determination of the reviewers raised questions about that process, yes.
So what were the total dollar figures of those grants?
I believe total they came to about $2 million, but I'd have to get back to you with the precise number.
Are they still open?
They are still open, and there's about 400, at least as of the end of May, there was about $400,000 remaining on those 3 awards.
Okay, so one of the more startling observations made in your testimony is about how a rotator violated a 1-year ban when applying for $14 million in NSF funding, and how it appears that someone within the agency tried to cover that person's tracks by creating a different ID number for that person. Do you think that this is an isolated incident with one person knowingly and willfully ignoring government ethics rules, or do you have concerns that ethics violations are more widespread?
I certainly hope that this particular creation of a second PID is isolated, and I don't have evidence to show that is a widespread problem. But what we also found is, it would be very difficult for us to tell if who was doing that. So that is certainly is a matter of concern for us.
So do you think that a single person overseeing all of NSF's rotating personnel might do a better job in ensuring compliance with government ethics laws?
A single person overseeing, I think, that would certainly, having one person with broad responsibility to look at, the use of rotators and to ensure that they are being appropriately trained and sensitive to the issues of conflicts would help. Right now, the management is very diffuse, and that makes it difficult to ensure accountability.
In the interest of time, so we have one more member, is it all right if we...
I'll yield back, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westerman. Chair recognizes Mr. Tonko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While NSF's system is by no means perfect, I'm concerned by the majority's continued fixation with NSF's peer review process, which in large part relies on IPAs. Like any organization, NSF's processes have room for improvement. In response to past IG reports, NSF has taken concrete steps to improve its practices. It is likely that similar steps will be taken in response to the most recent report. However, based on what I have read, these reports are not signs of systemic problems that require dramatic changes to the overall structure of the rotator program. In fact, the costs that NSF has agreed to incur, which are associated with the rotator program, in part show how highly NSF values IPAs. The NSF in our system of university-based research is the envy of the rest of the world. NSF's model for funding has made this program the premier university-based scientific research program. And although we all want to limit costs and be accountable, certainly when it makes sense, we should be careful and weigh the savings against any possible reduction in associated benefits. Dr. Bakias, in regard to the last series of questions, I'm assuming you might have a response. Instead of going with my questions, I'll give you the time that I have remaining to perhaps respond to that earlier series of questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Conflicts of interest are taken very seriously at the National Science Foundation. This is one case. This is one individual. And that individual was recommended for termination, and that appointment was not renewed by NSF. Remember also, NSF is the one that discovered this and told the IG, which subsequently investigated it. We also then took two of our staff that have been talked about and administratively removed them in accordance with established procedures and applicable regulations. We proceeded very deliberately in this case. I've been at NSF for, like I said, the last 6 months. I was here 4 years before. This is the only case I have heard of. I did a couple of checks around at the agency. We found one person who knew of one other case. So the point I'm trying to make is conflicts of interest are taken very, very seriously. We can improve. Definitely we can improve, and we will try. But this is just one case, and I think we've tried to handle it in as best the way we possibly can. It's not acceptable what happened. We're not accepting what the IPA did, nor are we accepting what the two NSF staff members did. And we're trying to manage that one particular case very, very carefully. The 10 or so recommendations that the IG provided us on Friday, I got them Friday afternoon. I've had a chance to review them. We will definitely try to meet all of those recommendations as best we possibly can.
Can I get another question in, or are we ready to close?
It looks like we're going to need to close. We're running out of time quickly to get to the floor to vote. So,
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. Again, I thank the witnesses for their testimony and members for their questions. I would like to enter the following documents into the record for the 2010 IG report, the 2012 IG report, the 2013 IG report, and the June 2015 redacted IG report. Without objection, so ordered. And I'll also add Chairman Smith's opening statement. Without objection, so ordered. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional written comments and written questions for the members. The hearing is hereby adjourned. Thank you.
We're going to meet again here in another week or so.